Family, on this evening, our scripture is 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 7 through 9. Very familiar passage to students of the scripture. While you are turning to 1 Samuel chapter 18, I'd like to use an analogy that will help to illustrate the principles of our message for this evening. A number of years ago, I had a vehicle, a van as a matter of fact, that sometimes it would not start. Other times it would start and would not run right. And there were certain components that we constantly had to take it back to a mechanic to repair, to replace. And before you know it, those same parts would go out again. What we later discovered was that we had a remote start on that vehicle, and every time we hit the remote start, it would send an electrical surge to the van to tell it to start. The problem was that it was sending too much power to the components and it was frying out the parts. And so because of an excessive amount of power to the vehicle, sometimes it wouldn't start. Sometimes it would start and wouldn't run right. The purpose of that analogy is to ask us in life how many times are we not able to start or function properly because we give too much power not to a component but to an individual or individuals. How often is it in our lives that we find the saying to be true? The greatest prison people live in is the fear of what other people think. This is a case in 1 Samuel chapter 18, starting with verse number 7. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him, and he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. What we see in Saul is the problem of giving too much power to what other people think. This affected his ego, it affected his self-esteem, it affected his relationships, and it hurt his kingdom. It led to him seeking efforts to hurt David, and it led to his own demise. And while we can be critical of Saul, we must ask ourselves, do we give too much power to what other people think? Before you say, no, I don't care what people think, we have to recognize that until we care more about what God thinks than what other people think, then we will never be totally free. You think about how we respond to others and think about things like we concern ourselves with what someone said about me. It just ruins our day. Or we feel bad about ourselves sometimes because someone else feels bad about me. We need prayer because someone mistreated me. We are upset because we had an expectation of what someone should have done that they did not do. We feel inferior when someone did not choose us. There are times that the choices someone makes, and we have to deal with their consequences. There are times people make choices and we are dissatisfied, not necessarily because we have to deal with their consequences, but in our love or concern for them, we don't like the consequences they must deal with. Sometimes we feel the pain of what someone is not sharing with us. Sometimes it's the pain of someone not apologizing or making amends. At other times, it's the pain of someone not acknowledging me. Someone did not honor me. Someone did not recognize me. Someone does not respect me. Just like the vehicle described in our analogy that was mentioned, sometimes we can't get our start, or even if we start, we cannot operate correctly because too much power is going to the wrong places. We should never live our lives in such a way that we just outright don't care about people and that we're so arrogant or so cocky that what people may think is always irrelevant. But we have to also manage and monitor how much power we give to people, because it should never be of such that it affects how we see ourselves. You think about your friends, your family, your co-workers, your neighbors. What someone says, thinks, or feels can negatively impact what you will say about yourself, what you will think about yourself, and how you'll feel about yourself. Here are some questions that you may want to consider that are very important in having a very healthy self-orientation and disposition. The first question is, how do I define myself? It is obvious in this passage that Saul defined himself in part by how much accolades that he gets from others. Do you know that some of the greatest people in history who were looked upon as some of the greatest people of their time, that during their time they were not popular, and though history has recorded them as being great individuals, that many people had to endure mistreatment and being talked about. But they persisted, not because they allowed other people's opinions to matter, but they had a means by which they defined themselves. The second question is, how am I going to feel about myself? You choose to feel about you the way you choose to feel about you. If you are allowing what others say, think, or feel to affect how you feel about yourself, you might be giving them too much power. Which leads to the last question. How much of myself am I going to give to others? When people don't think right about you, when people don't speak right about you, when people don't feel right about you, do you really want them to have that much power about you? Again, I quote, until we care more about what God thinks than what other people think, we can never truly be free. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister.